Hi, Strawberry Park first graders. My name is Katie Conold. I'm the education coordinator at the Tread of Pioneers Museum. Have your parents like us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get lots of other fun Pioneer videos like this Tread of Pioneers Museum. We've met a few times this year already, and I would have been coming to your classroom this week. However, we're all at home, so I am making this video for you. So today we are going to continue to talk about the same person we've talked about the last two times we've met. Do you remember her name? Lulie Crawford. She's the daughter of the founding family of Steamboat Springs. Her parents, Jim and Maggie Crawford, decided to come to Steamboat and build a cabin and settle here and begin the town of Steamboat Springs as we know it today. So we have talked about how Lulie loved to do watercolors, and we watercolored together in the beginning of the year. We visited your classroom a couple of months ago, and we read entries from Lulie Crawford's diary, and we learned more about her daily life. And today we are going to talk more about Lulie and her family and what they lived in. So when they got here, there was nothing. The only people that were here were the Native Americans, a part of the Ute tribe called the Yampatika, and they were just here in the summers. The Crawfords and the Yampatika got along pretty well, and they helped each other out quite a bit over the years being here. But come fall, the Native Americans would pack up their wickiups, that's what they slept in and lived in, and they moved south to be in an area that wasn't as harsh in the winter. The Crawfords stayed, and so they had to have a sturdier house than the Native Americans, and that's actually what we are going to talk about today. So I have some pictures here. So this was James Crawford, Jim Crawford, and then that was Lulie's dad. Here's Lulie's mom, Maggie Crawford. And here is a picture of Lulie. I don't have any pictures of her as a kid, which is usually what I show you. This is Lulie as she was a grown-up. She was also the first teacher in Steamboat Springs and ran the first school here, which she ran out of their log cabin. So they built a cabin. They had to use what they had here, so trees. So I only have at home a picture of their second house. And the only difference is that this cabin had 4 bedrooms and their first cabin just had just one room. So as you can probably tell, it was made out of trees. They just had their axes and their saws and they chopped down trees and got them to where they had a flat spot at the top of the bottom, and then they stacked them on these corners here. They put notches in the ends of the logs and they stacked them. And this log cabin, I think they built over time. They added a room every summer or so. And then the top, the roof is a sod roof. In 1883, once they had a sawmill here, which is basically just a building with a lot of fancy tools, they were able to cut down trees and make boards more like what we're used to seeing today. And then this was their third house, which is what they call a frame house. And you can even see the difference. Obviously the house looks way different than the cabin and the roof looks way different, but so does the fence. So today we are going to read a book where we learn a little bit more about what it must have been like for Lulie and her family to build a cabin. So this is called A Little Prairie House, and this is based off of the books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. So this is about a girl named Laura, and it takes place in a different state, but I think most of this would have been very similar to what Lulie experienced. Once upon a time, a little girl named Laura traveled in a covered wagon across the giant prairie. She traveled with her pa, her ma, her big sister Mary, her little sister Carrie, and their good old bulldog Jack. They were searching for the perfect place to build themselves a little house. One day, after the little family had been traveling across the prairie for a long time, Laura and Mary woke up earlier than the sun. They ate their breakfast of cornmeal mush and hurried to help Ma wash the dishes. Pa was loading everything into the wagon. When the sun rose, they were driving across the prairie. There was no road to drive on, so Pet and Patty, the two gentle mustangs, waded through the grasses. Later that morning, Pa said, "Whoa." The wagon stopped. "Here we are," he said, "right where we'll build our house." Laura and Mary jumped to the ground. All around them, there was nothing but prairie. So different than what Lulie and her family saw in Steamboat. Right away, Pa and Ma began to unload the wagon. They took everything out and piled it on the ground while Laura and Mary and Jack watched. Then Pa drove the wagon down into the prairie out of sight to get a load of logs from the creek bottom. Laura was a little frightened to be left on the prairie without the wagon. She wanted to hide in the tall grass like a little prairie chicken, but instead she helped Ma while Mary sat on the grass and minded baby Carrie. Soon, Pa came back with a load of logs. For days and days, Pa kept hauling logs. He made 2 piles of them, one for the house and one for the stable. When he had enough logs, it was time to build. Pa began the house first. All by himself, Pa built the walls of the house. 3 logs high, and then Ma helped him. Log by log, Pa and Ma built the walls higher and higher. Soon, Laura couldn't climb over them anymore. Then, one day, Pa went off hunting, and he came home whistling merrily. "Good news," he shouted. Pa had met a neighbor on the other side of the creek. His name was Mr. Edwards, and he was going to help Pa finish building the house. Then Pa would help Mr. Edwards build his house. Early the next morning, Mr. Edwards came. He was lean and tall, and he bowed to Ma politely. He told Laura he was a wildcat from Tennessee, and he could spit further than Laura had ever imagined anyone could spit. Laura tried and tried, but she could never spit so far or so well as Mr. Edwards could. Mr. Edwards was a fast worker. In one day, he and Pa built the walls of the little house as high as Pa wanted them. They sang while they worked, and their axes made the chips fly. They cut a tall hole for the door and square holes for the windows. Laura couldn't wait to see the inside of the house, and as soon as the tall hole was cut, she ran inside. Strips of sunshine came through the cracks in the walls and went all across Laura's hands and arms and feet. At the end of the day, Mr. Edwards said he would go home, but Pa and Ma said he must stay to supper. Ma had made stewed jackrabbit and steaming hot thick cornbread with molasses. Mr. Edwards said he surely did appreciate that supper. Then Pa took out his fiddle and began to sing. Suddenly, Mr. Edwards jumped up and began to dance. He danced like a jumping jack in the moonlight while Pa's fiddle kept on rollicking and Laura's and Mary's hands were clapping together. Pa played and played, and Mr. Edwards danced and danced. Finally, Mr. Edwards said he should go. He must go. "Play me down the road," he said. So Pa played, and Pa and Laura and Mr. Edwards sang with all their might until Laura could not hear Mr. Edwards anymore. Only the wind rustled in the prairie grasses, and the big yellow moon sailed high over the new little house on the prairie. So a lot like Laura and her family in the book, Lulie and her family did the same thing. They packed up their wagon in Missouri and they traveled a long time to get to Steamboat Springs. And then it took them a while to build a cabin. They built their first cabins at Iron Spring, which is across the street from the library. And today it just kind of looks like a big grassy park. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the story. I do have an extension activity. It is posted on the same YouTube channel, Tread of Pioneers Museum, and it is entitled Build Your Own Log Cabin. So feel free to click on that and build your own log cabin.